Transport in living organisms. We are looking at organisms needing or requiring a transport system. We are looking at some of the organisms that lack the transport system. Some need a transport system, others don't need a transport system. Why? Why do some of the animals need a transport system, and why do some of them don't need a transport system? Particularly, look at the mammals. Why do the mammals need a transport system? The transport system in mammals is the cardiovascular system. Why do they need a cardiovascular system? And why do we look at some of the organisms like the protozoa and the plant helminths lacking a transport system? So we see like some of these animals, like the mammals, they are relatively large and they have highly organized with different body regions that are adapted to carry out different functions. So you find out that these animals, the mammals, they are large and they are highly organized with different body regions adapted to carry out different functions. For example, you look at the cells in the small intestines, they are adapted to absorb food. Those in the alveolus, they are adapted for gaseous exchange. These specialized regions, they depend on each other. You look at the intestinal cells, they need oxygen that is acquired by the alveoli. The alveoli needs nutrients that is acquired by the small intestine. So this kind of interdependence, different body regions, different body organs, they are depending on one another. We are looking at them having an interdependence where this one depends on the products or what has been acquired by the other region of the body. So you find out that most of these substances, they can move by diffusion across these exchange surfaces. You find out like the gut and the alveoli, they move by diffusion in and out of the individual cells. However, as these mammals, they are too large. They are too large to rely solely on diffusion to move these materials throughout their bodies. Because they are too large, so you require these substances to move over long distances. And in these long distances, these materials cannot move by simple diffusion and other processes like osmosis and maybe facilitated diffusion. So it calls for a transport system that can be efficient. It calls for bulk movement of substances from one area to another due to the differences in pressures. When you look at the plants, you will find out when we go to transport in plants, these plants, they have all translocation of sucrose, translocation of the manufactured food within the plant by mass flow hypothesis. So you find out that these guys cannot only depend on diffusion, and it would be sufficient for transporting these materials throughout the whole body. So the larger, compact, and more active an organism is, the more the need for a transport system due to small surface area to volume ratio. This small surface area to volume ratio reduces the rate of diffusion of materials from the body surface to the cells in the middle of the organism. However, you look at some of these organisms which lack the transport system, e.g. the protozoa and the plant helminths, it is because for them they are so small in size and they are being flattened in shape, which gives these animals a large surface area to volume ratio. Hence, it enables free and rapid diffusion of materials from one part of the body to another part. But consequently, you will look at these large multicellular organisms having an elaborate transport system that carries the useful substances such as oxygen and glucose to the cells and carries the waste products of metabolism from those areas to areas where they are going to be excreted from. So these materials, the waste products of metabolism, they have to be transported from the regions where they are being produced to areas where they are going to be excreted from. Why? When these guys are allowed to accumulate, then some of them are toxic and they would bring a disadvantage to the organism in that this toxicity, the poisonous nature of some of these substances would alter or it would affect the working or the functioning of these body systems. So an elaborate transport system has two major features: an increased surface area of the sites of exchange of materials. Such sites include the lungs and the gills in humans or in most of the mammals, and the gills in the pisces, those are the fish, where oxygen is absorbed, and the villi of the ileum where food nutrients are absorbed by the alimentary canal. So they have specific structures that bring about an increased surface area of these sites of exchange of the materials. Then a system whereby the circulatory medium or the circulating medium carries the absorbed materials or the substances at a faster rate than diffusion. Of course, when you have an effective transport system, then it works better. It is much effective than simple diffusion. So these materials are carried at a faster rate than when there is diffusion. In some of the organisms with a blood circulatory system, blood flow is not confined to blood vessels, but instead it flows within a blood-filled cavity called hymocoel. This is in arthropods and the mollusks. So their blood is not confined, or blood flow is not confined to blood vessels like in humans, where you say you have the arteries, you have the veins that are bringing about transportation of this blood. But for them, blood flows within a blood-filled cavity known as hymocoel. In some other organisms with the blood circulatory system, blood flow is confined to blood vessels only. Those are the vertebrates, and in some of the invertebrates like the earthworms. We are looking at organisms possessing the blood circulatory system. The vertebrates, we are looking at the invertebrates having the blood circulatory system, having the cardiovascular system. So why? What are the functions of blood? What is the significance of a blood circulatory system? One, we need to carry out tissue respiration. And if we are to carry out tissue respiration, we must transport oxygen and the soluble food substances to the tissues to be used as raw materials for transportation. These guys, you look at glucose from the alimentary canal, it has to be transported to the liver, it has to be transported to the active muscle cells, where rapid respiration will be taking place from. Respiration not only depending in absence of or on absence of oxygen, but look, it requires oxygen to have complete oxidation of glucose. For you to generate 38 ATP molecules from a glucose, one glucose molecule, you need oxygen. That means you must have aerobic respiration taking place. So these materials must move from where they are entering the system to where they are required for use. Also, as a result of tissue respiration, you have products, the byproducts. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of respiration, and it should not be allowed to accumulate, because once it accumulates, when we are looking at excretion, osmoregulation, and homeostasis, we look at carbon dioxide accumulation altering the pH. Yet the pH has to be maintained constant at around 7.4 within the body. So it has to be transported away from the tissues, and it is mainly transported in form of bicarbonate ions and taken to the lungs for its removal from the body. So you have oxygen being transported in form of oxyhemoglobin from the respiratory surfaces to the tissues. You have hydration. Water must move from the gut to all the tissues. We have nutrition. These soluble, well-digested food materials, they have to be moved from the gut to the body tissues. And there is no way how these materials can move from the gut to the body tissues without the blood circulatory system. Excretion. These waste products of metabolism, they must be moved from the tissues to the excretory organs for their removal from the body. So you will have blood transporting urea from the liver to the kidney in order for it to be removed from the body. There is temperature regulation. If you don't distribute the heat from organs where it is being generated, then you will have these organs being destroyed. You will have the enzymes being denatured, because excessive heat will bring about high temperatures, which will denature enzymes. Hence, the functioning of the body will be altered. There is maintenance of constant pH. You cannot allow the fluctuations in pH. You have to maintain it at a constant rate, at a constant level. So you have to make sure there is saturation of the plasma proteins that are manufactured by the liver that will act as buffers to maintain the pH of the body fluid is constant. This enables, or it brings about, efficient functioning as the charges will denature the enzymes. You have growth, development, and coordination. What happens? Blood transports different metabolites such as glucose, amino acids, and hormones needed for growth and development of the body. There is defense. The blood defends the body against diseases in the following ways. One, by using some of the white blood cells, the leukocytes. These are phagocytically, or they phagocytically ingest and destroy the pathogens that cause diseases. So they must be moved as they are investigating the body to see if they are some of the pathogens, the microorganisms that have already entered the body. By forming a blood clot around the wound, that is the role of platelets. By use of the immune system, or the immune response mechanism towards infection. So these antibodies, they must be moved from areas where they are produced to areas where they are required to attack the antigens or the pathogens that have entered the body, and then they destroy them. So as we are looking at the cardiovascular system, we are looking at the blood circulatory system, which provides the most important means of mass flow in mammals. So very many substances are getting carried in blood. which is pumped in special vessels continuously and fairly rapidly to all parts of the body. So all these materials we have looked at, they must be moved, they must be transported to other areas from where they are being produced, or from areas where they are being absorbed from regions where they are supposed to perform the specific functions they are meant to perform. Now, within the blood circulatory system, then you expect the mechanism or the fluid that is going to transport these guys to be blood. So this is a highly specialized fluid tissue, which consists of different types of cells suspended in a pale yellow fluid known as the blood plasma. So it is a highly specialized fluid tissue. So what is blood plasma? This is a pale yellow fluid component of blood composed of the plasma proteins and the blood serum, where the blood cells are going to be suspended. So it is composed of the plasma proteins and the blood serum, where these blood cells are going to be suspended. And it carries the biggest percentage of blood and consists of a colorless fluid known as serum and also the plasma proteins. So it is in the blood serum that all the different soluble materials are dissolved. E.g., you'll have urea, the hormones, you have the soluble food substances, you have bicarbonate ions, and so on. All these guys, they must be soluble or they must be dissolved in this blood serum for them to be transported. Some of the plasma proteins are manufactured by the liver, and they include the following. These are some of the plasma proteins that are present within the blood plasma. You have fibrinogen, and this protein is important for the normal blood clotting. It is very important. We shall look at it as we are looking at the platelets. It plays an important role for normal blood clotting by changing into fibrin in the presence of thrombin enzyme. So fibrinogen is originally soluble, and during the process of blood clotting, it is converted or it is changed into fibrin, which is insoluble. You have prothrombin. This is the inactive form of proteolytic enzyme thrombin used in converting fibrinogen to fibrin during the clotting of blood. So this is the inactive form of the proteolytic enzyme thrombin that is used in converting fibrinogen to fibrin during the clotting of blood. We have another plasma protein known as globulin, where globulin, in addition to prothrombin, they play important roles in homeostasis. These guys maintain pH of the body fluid is constant, where or by acting as buffers. We have the blood cells. These are the three main types of blood cells. We have erythrocytes, those are the red blood cells. We have leukocytes, the white blood cells, and we have the platelets. These are the three main types of blood cells that are present in blood. First of all, we shall begin with the erythrocytes, the red blood cells. And these are the small numerous. They are very numerous, very many. Biconcave disc-shaped cells, mainly important in transportation of oxygen as oxyhemoglobin from the respiratory surfaces, that is the lungs, and gives it to the tissues. These guys, they are manufactured by the bone marrow in adults and by the liver in the fetus. So how are they transporting oxygen? They do not just transport oxygen as O2, no. The oxygen combines with hemoglobin, a pigment in red blood cells, and it forms a molecule or a compound known as oxyhemoglobin. So oxygen is transported in the body in form of oxyhemoglobin. How are they adapted to this function of transporting the oxygen from the respiratory surfaces to the tissues? These guys, they have a red pigment known as hemoglobin in their cytoplasm, which has a high affinity for oxygen and therefore rapidly transports the oxygen. So it is this red pigment hemoglobin that is present in the red blood cells, which has a very high affinity for oxygen, and therefore there is rapid transport of oxygen. Their membranes are thin, hence they increase permeability. And once permeability has been increased, then it enables faster diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide into them. As well as they possess a flexible membrane, which can enable them to change their original shape and squeeze themselves in blood capillaries in order to allow the exchange of respiratory gases. You can look at the front and side view of the red blood cells. They contain an enzyme known as carbonic anhydrase within the cytoplasm, which enables most of the carbon dioxide to be transported in form of bicarbonate ions by catalyzing the reactions between carbon dioxide and water from carbonic acid. These guys as well, they do not possess the nucleus. They lack a nucleus, and once the space that should have been occupied by the nucleus is free, then it increases the surface area, or it provides enough space for hemoglobin in order to carry a lot of oxygen in form of oxyhemoglobin. These guys have a biconcave disc shape, which provides a large surface area that enhances maximum diffusion of enough oxygen into these guys. Now, when you look at this, they have an enzyme known as carbonic anhydrase. We can't say it is an adaptation for transporting oxygen. Now, this guy, hemoglobin, in presence of carbon dioxide, it takes up carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide outcompetes oxygen for the active sites or for the binding sites in hemoglobin. So in terms of affinity, it has a very high affinity for carbon dioxide than it has for oxygen. That is why when you move to high altitudes where we have low partial pressures of oxygen and low high partial pressures of carbon dioxide, less oxygen is transported in the body. And for you to be able to transport a lot of oxygen, these guys must increase in number. And we have what we call as acclimatization, such that they are able to transport oxygen in the body. We have the white blood cells, the leukocytes, which are myoboid cells having a nucleus and a colorless cytoplasm important for defense of the body against infections. They are very few than the erythrocytes, and they are about 7,000 per meter cubed of blood. They are mainly manufactured by the bone marrow, and they are classified into two main types, which include the following. We have the granulocytes. These are polymorphonuclear leukocytes, and agranulocytes, the mononuclear leukocytes. The granulocytes are the leukocytes with granules in their cytoplasm, and they possess the lobed nucleus. They are originating in the bone marrow, and they have three types. You have the basophils, which is 0.5%. You have eosinophils, that is 1.5%, and then neutrophils 70%. Look at the basophils, they produce heparin and histamine. Heparin is an anticoagulant which prevents blood clotting in blood vessels. And then histamine is a substance that is released during allergic reactions. It brings about allergic reactions by widening and increasing the permeability of small blood vessels, which results into symptoms like itching, localized swellings, and sneezing. That is histamine, which brings about allergic reactions. And it brings about allergic reactions in that the body, something has entered the body that the body is not recognizing, or the body is against its presence in the body. So it brings about allergic reactions as the body is resisting this guy's presence. We have the eosinophils, that is 1.5%. They possess the antihistamine properties, and their number increases in people with allergic reactions such as high fever, asthma, so as to combat the effects of histamine. We have the neutrophils. These engulf, or you can call them the phagocytes. They engulf pathogens phagocytotically and digest them actively inside to defend the body against diseases. So these ones are the ones that normally bring about the prevention or attacking the pathogens or the new cells that have entered the body. When you look at the mononuclear, or you can call them the agranulocytes, for them, they possess no granules in the cytoplasm. That is agranular, they lack. Usually with a spherical or bean-shaped nucleus, they originate in the bone marrow and lymph nodes. And they have two types, that is the monocytes, 4%, and lymphocytes, 24%. Look at the monocytes. These ones, they enter the tissues from which they develop into phagocytes, develop into macrophages. These are the macrophages that carry out phagocytosis to defend the body against pathogens, and they are also being shaped. Have the lymphocytes that are produced in the thymus gland and the lymph nodes. The precursor cells of these guys in the bone marrow form a tissue which is called lymphoid tissue. These lymphocytes are usually round, and they possess a small quantity of the cytoplasm, and the lymphocytes produce antibodies, agglutins, lysins, opsonins, and antitoxins. So in adults, they are produced and they develop in the bone marrow and in lymph glands, while in embryos, they are produced in the thymus gland, the liver, spleen, and they have a lifespan of 21 days. So their lifespan is very short. Very short. They have a short lifespan. The adaptations have enzymes. They are larger than the pathogens. They are numerous, produce antibodies which attack the pathogens, and they have a sensitive cell surface membrane that detects the microorganisms. So they have an irregular shaped nucleus which allows them to squeeze through the narrow capillaries, and this nucleus contains many genes for the control of antibody production. Of course, they do not have a fixed shape, hence the amoeboid movements are being encouraged, or they are allowed, which are used to engulf the pathogens. And as well, they have the enzymes in their cytoplasm that are used to digest the engulfed microorganisms. We have the blood platelets, which We can call them the thrombocytes, and these guys are irregularly shaped, membrane-bound cell fragments lacking the nuclei and are formed from the bone marrow cells. They are responsible for starting up the process of blood clotting, and they are about 250, that is 250,000 blood platelets per 1 millimeter tube of blood. So they are relatively present in large numbers because they are responsible for starting up the process of blood clotting. Process of blood clotting normally comes in when these guys have wounds, when you have a cut, and so on. So our next lesson, our next video, we shall talk about transport of oxygen, and we proceed with transport in living organisms.